Sandra Kellerman stood under the harsh fluorescent lights, pointing at my daughter like she was some kind of monster. "She's a danger to this community," Sandra yelled, her voice cracking. But the officer wasn't buying it. "You're on camera, ma'am," he said, eyes cold. The room went silent. I plugged my phone into the TV, the footage ready to play. I hit play, and the whole room went still as the video rolled. There it was, Sandra's slap caught on tape. But that wasn't all. As the room watched, I prepared to drop something far worse than a slap. Sandra Kellerman wasn't just the HOA president, she was the self-appointed ruler of Cedar Grove. Armed with a clipboard and a sharp tongue, she didn't just enforce the rules, she bent them to suit her needs. Everything about the neighborhood had to fit her perfect vision. The first time I met her, it wasn't about the HOA at all. She cornered us in the driveway, her eyes practically glowing with excitement. "Your daughter is the same age as my Brandon," she said, barely letting Lily or me speak. "He's a good boy, smart, athletic on the football team. Such a catch." She didn't even try to hide the insinuation. Maybe she should hang out with him more. He could really use a nice girl. I glanced at Brandon across the street, leaning on his lifted truck, staring at his phone like Lily didn't even exist. The chill creeping up my spine told me everything I needed to know. Sandra wasn't offering friendship. She was setting up a plan. It didn't stop there. Every time Lily and I stepped outside, Sandra appeared at the mailbox by the pool, even at the bus stop, nudging Lily into uncomfortable conversations. She wasn't just pushing her son on my daughter, she was trying to control every inch of our lives. And when Lily turned down Brandon, Sandra's obsession turned into something far darker. When I first moved to Cedar Grove, it was supposed to be the fresh start Lily and I needed. After my wife passed away, I'd spent too long in a small apartment just scraping by. I wanted more for my daughter. I wanted a house with a small backyard, a quiet neighborhood and streets where she could ride her bike without fear. Cedar Grove seemed perfect, a suburban paradise with neat lawns, quiet nights, and all the promise of small-town life. I didn't ask for much, just peace, a little space, and a neighborhood where people cared about more than rules. And then I met Sandra Kellerman. Sandra was the HOA president, and her first impression was exactly what you'd expect from someone who believed they were the beating heart of the community. From day one, I learned that she was in charge of not just enforcing rules, but shaping the very essence of Cedar Grove. When I moved in, she wasted no time sending me a list of neighborhood guidelines. Trash cans couldn't be left out more than 20 minutes, lawn height had to be under 1.5 inches, and don't even think about leaving Christmas lights up after January 5th. I wasn't thrilled, but I was compliant. I made sure everything was in line, not wanting to ruffle any feathers, and for a while it seemed like that was all it would be, just petty things. But then Sandra's focus turned to Lily. I should have seen it coming when she first cornered us in the driveway. "Your daughter is the same age as Brandon," she said a little too brightly. "She'd be perfect for him. Brandon's such a good kid, smart on the honor roll. He's already looking at colleges, you know." She didn't even let Lily get a word in. Instead, her gaze flicked toward her son Brandon, lounging by his truck across the street. He barely looked up from his phone, too busy with whatever teenage nonsense he was into. He didn't even acknowledge Lily's presence. But Sandra didn't care about reality. She had a vision, and she made it clear that Lily was part of it. I brushed it off. But that's when the subtle pressure started. Sandra began popping up everywhere at the mailbox, the pool, the bus stop. She'd ask Lily how things were going, always too interested in the smallest details. It wasn't just small talk. It was a push to get Lily involved with Brandon, whether she wanted to or not. The worst part, it didn't stop. And when Lily turned Brandon down, Sandra's obsession became more than just awkward conversations. It became an all-out campaign. It started small, almost laughable. First, there was the garden gnome. Barry was a charming little decoration in our front yard, but apparently it violated some obscure HOA rule about height limits. A letter appeared in my mailbox with a photo of Barry circled in red like he'd been caught in a crime. The message was passive-aggressive. "We appreciate your compliance in adhering to neighborhood standards." I showed the letter to Lily, trying to laugh it off. "A gnome, really," I said. She rolled her eyes. "Dad, what's next? A ticket for grass clippings." But it wasn't funny anymore. The next week, the complaints kept coming. First it was the lawn, then the garage door. I started getting warning emails for the smallest infractions, things that wouldn't even register in any other neighborhood. But in Cedar Grove, they were violations. "Your garage door was left open for 17 minutes, which raises security concerns," one email read. I sent a polite reply asking for the specific rule reference. It was ignored. Instead, Sandra sent another email, this time about the angle of our mailbox. It was too far from the sidewalk. It felt like Sandra was watching us, waiting for us to slip up. The first real sign that Sandra was crossing a line came when she started showing up uninvited. It was always when I least expected it. One morning I found her at the edge of our yard, clipboard in hand, measuring the length of our bushes. "Your garden's a bit out of compliance," she said, not bothering to explain which rule we'd broken this time. It wasn't just the yard anymore. I started noticing her watching us from across the street. Sometimes she'd be in her car, parked near the cul-de-sac, just sitting there staring at our house. The weirdest part, she didn't even try to hide it. I would catch her eyes and she wouldn't look away. Then one afternoon, Lily came to me, looking uncomfortable. "She cornered me again," Lily said, her voice tight. "At the bus stop. She started talking about Brandon again, and how I should really give him a chance. I could feel the tension building between us and Sandra, but I didn't realize how deep it had gone. The next violation came a few days later. This time it was for excessive noise on Friday night, something about a few too many voices during our family movie night. I shot back an email asking for specifics. Sandra's reply was, "Cold, Cedar Grove is a family-friendly community. Perhaps you should take your loud activities elsewhere." It was clear Sandra wasn't interested in just enforcing the rules. She was pushing her agenda, and Lily was the target. The true escalation came the day Brandon started hanging around even more. I'd warned him a dozen times to leave Lily alone, but he kept showing up at our door, insisting she needed to go to his party or study group. Lily had no interest, but Brandon wouldn't take no for an answer. He began following her to the bus stop, standing too close, leaning against his truck like he owned the street. It wasn't innocent anymore, it was harassment. Then the letter arrived. It was about my car. My car. The one I'd parked in the same spot every single day since we moved in. But Sandra, in her ever-watchful gaze, had decided that my car was violating HOA rules. Specifically, it was blocking the line of sight from the curb. The violation notice was attached to the windshield, along with a stern warning about the consequences of continued non-compliance. I was furious. I couldn't believe this was the final straw. I called Sandra, demanding an explanation. Her voice was all syrup and sweetness. "Oh, Mr. Hart, I'm just following up on concerns brought to my attention. It's really about safety, you know." But I knew. I wasn't blind. This wasn't about safety. It was about control. It was Sandra's way of pushing me, testing how much I would take before I snapped. Things took a darker turn when Sandra went behind my back and made a false report to the police. I'll never forget the phone call. It was a quiet Wednesday morning when my phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, but the words sent my heart into overdrive. "Mr. Hart, this is Officer Ramirez with Fairview PD. We've received a report that your daughter assaulted a neighbor at the Cedar Grove pool. Are you able to bring her in to talk?" I was stunned. "Officer, we're on our way to urgent care right now because that neighbor Sandra Kellerman slapped my daughter." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Slapped her. Hard enough to leave a mark," I said. "And while you're at it, I suggest you pull the security footage from the pool cameras." The officer didn't say much after that, but I could hear the shift in his voice. It was clear Sandra had jumped the gun this time, and she was about to regret it. By the time we reached urgent care, the game had changed. I wasn't just a dad trying to protect my daughter anymore. I was a man with a file full of receipts, and Sandra was about to pay the price. I thought I knew how things were going to play out, but what happened next turned everything on its head. I was on a Zoom call that afternoon when my phone buzzed. The first text was from Lily, then another and another. The last message was from Mia, her friend. It was simple, but the words hit me like a punch to the gut. Mrs. Kellerman slapped Lily. "We need you. Now." I couldn't breathe for a second. My heart raced, but I couldn't think. The words didn't make sense. I opened the door to find Lily standing there, tears streaming down her face, her cheek bright red, the outline of Sandra's handprint clear as day. "Get in the car," I said, my voice barely a whisper. We were halfway to urgent care when the phone rang again. It was Officer Ramirez. This time he was on our side. "We voided the initial complaint Sandra filed against your daughter," he said. "We'll be filing our own report for assault against her." And just like that, everything changed. Sandra's grip on the neighborhood, on me, on Lily, it was slipping, and I was going to make sure it never came back. By the time we got to the HOA meeting, the tension in the room was unbearable. The emergency session was called by none other than Sandra herself, claiming that there had been a misunderstanding about what happened at the pool. But from the looks on the faces of the other board members, no one seemed convinced. They were just waiting for someone to speak up. Sandra stood at the front, gavel in hand, trying to maintain her usual air of control. "As your HOA president, I want to address the unfortunate incident involving the Harts. There's been a lot of misinformation spread online, but I assure you we are pursuing appropriate action against this smear campaign. Her voice was smooth, practiced, but it was too late. The crowd was already murmuring whispers bouncing off the walls. I stood up, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. "I'd like to comment," I said, my voice steady but sharp. The room went silent. Sandra's face twisted in irritation, but she couldn't stop me. I walked to the front, plugged my phone into the HDMI cable, and looked directly at Sandra. "Let's all watch the video," I said, tapping play. The TV flickered to life, and everyone went still. The footage was clear, there was no denying it. There was Lily standing near the pool gate trying to walk away, and there was Sandra advancing on her, with a finger pointed like she was scolding a child. The video was silent, but the tension was palpable. My thumb hovered over the screen, and I hit play just as Sandra's hand lifted. The slap was sharp and unmistakable. The room went completely silent. I heard a few gasps, and then someone whispered, "Oh my God." The camera captured every second Sandra's hand connecting with Lily's face, the shock in Lily's eyes, the way Sandra didn't hesitate. I paused the video on the frame where the slap landed, the impact frozen in time. "This is my daughter," I said, voice calm, though the anger was boiling inside me. "And this is your HOA president." The room was electric now. Everyone was staring at Sandra, who had gone completely pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I could feel the weight of their eyes on her, the realization sinking in. Sandra sputtered, trying to regain control of the situation. "You can't just, this isn't," her voice cracked, but I wasn't done. I pulled out a folder and set it down in front of the board members, watching their eyes widen as I opened it. Inside was a mountain of evidence: bank statements, property filings, and printouts of discrepancies Sandra thought she'd hidden. "This," I said, tapping the top sheet, "is what we're really here to discuss." A few gasps rippled through the room as I read aloud. "Over the past 3 years, $47,000 has vanished from the HOA accounts. Payments have been made to a company, Kellerman Community Services LLC, that doesn't even exist outside a P.O. box, a company that just so happens to share Sandra's maiden name." The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sandra's face turned ashen. "You can't just," she started, but I cut her off. "And these payments," I continued, pulling out more documents, "were for landscaping, maintenance, and administrative work that was either overpriced or never completed. You've been siphoning money from this community, Sandra, all while you harass my daughter over gnomes and mailboxes." Sandra tried to stand her ground. "This is illegal," she snapped. "You can't do this in front of everyone." "I can," I said, "because the evidence is clear. And the community deserves to know who's been running this HOA like a personal piggy bank." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The room was no longer divided. The tension once in Sandra's favor now worked against her. The board members were no longer passive. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. The room was still buzzing with whispers as Sandra stood there frozen, her face drained of color. For a moment, no one spoke, and then Malik, the treasurer, finally cleared his throat. I move that we remove Sandra Kellerman from the position of HOA president, effective immediately." The silence that followed felt like an eternity, but then one by one, hands started going up. First, Malik, then a woman in the second row. "Seconded," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "All in favor?" Malik asked, his voice tentative. Every single hand in the room shot up, except for the empty chair at the front where Sandra had been sitting. "Motion passes," Malik said, his voice still sounding a little stunned. "I guess I'm acting president until we can hold a proper election." The room exploded into applause, but it wasn't the loud celebratory kind. It was more like the release of years of pent-up frustration, a collective sigh of relief that they were finally free from the grip of someone who'd made their lives a living hell. As the clapping faded, I could feel Lily squeeze my hand. She was smiling, but there was something different about it. It wasn't a smile of relief, it was a smile of victory. We'd won. Sandra, however, was having none of it. "You think this will save you," she hissed, glaring at me as the officers stepped forward to escort her out. "You'll regret this. This neighborhood will fall apart without me. You're all fools." But her threats fell flat. Everyone had already seen the truth. Sandra wasn't the protector of Cedar Grove. She was the poison. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, the fallout from Sandra's actions was in full swing. The state HOA board had launched a formal investigation, and so had the district attorney's office. The fraudulent transactions Sandra had orchestrated were too large to ignore, and her carefully crafted web of lies was unraveling fast. In the weeks that followed, Sandra's life continued to spiral. She was charged with misdemeanor assault for the slap, but that was the least of her worries. The DA's office was now looking at the full extent of her financial crimes. When the audit came back, the word embezzlement was used far more than anyone in Cedar Grove had anticipated. Sandra's defense attorney tried to spin her actions as mere clerical errors and overzealous protection of the neighborhood, but the evidence didn't lie. Her fake LLC, the inflated invoices for non-existent services, it was all too obvious. After a few months of legal wrangling, Sandra reached a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial. She was sentenced to 120 days in county jail, 18 months of probation, and a hefty fine to reimburse the HOA. She also had to take anger management classes, though I doubt that would change anything. And to top it all off, a restraining order was placed against her, barring her from having any contact with me or my family. Her lawyer's attempt to claim Sandra was the victim of a smear campaign fell flat in court. The judge, unimpressed with Sandra's theatrics, cut her off. Mrs. Kellerman, you embezzled money from your neighbors and assaulted a minor because she wouldn't date your son. There is no version of this where you're the victim. Sandra didn't take the news well. As the judge read her sentence, her face turned an unhealthy shade of white, her hands trembling on the defense table. But, Your Honor, she began, her voice cracking. I was just trying to protect the community. The judge didn't even flinch. That's enough, he snapped, signaling to the bailiff. Escort Mrs. Kellerman out. And that was it. The last of her power crumbled in front of everyone who'd watched her rule the neighborhood with an iron fist for so long. The final chapter of Sandra's reign came when she was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. The once proud HOA president who'd terrorized the neighborhood for years was now a shell of herself. The doors of the courtroom slammed shut behind her, and I could feel a strange kind of peace settle over me. Lily looked up at me with a grin. You did it, Dad. You actually did it. Don't get used to it, I said, a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. But yeah, we did it. In the weeks that followed, Cedar Grove started to heal. The HOA board was restructured, and the financial discrepancies were addressed. The new President Malik promised a fresh start, and for the first time in a long while, the neighborhood actually felt like a community again. People weren't afraid to ask questions, to demand accountability. The fear that had hung over us like a dark cloud for so long began to fade. As for Sandra, her fall from grace was swift, but the real twist came when Cedar Grove realized just how much she'd taken from them. The fines, the threats, the constant pressure, it was all gone, replaced with a sense of unity that hadn't existed before. And as for me and Lily, we found peace in knowing that sometimes doing the right thing meant standing up, even when the person you're fighting against seems untouchable. I wasn't just a guy with a software degree anymore. I was a father who fought for his daughter and won. Thanks for having my back, Lily said, leaning into me as we walked home. I'll always have your back, I replied, even when I'm not wearing a cape. She smiled up at me. You're like the HOA Batman. I laughed. Please never say that again.